Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday, the 10th of December in London. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Caroline Hepke, coming to you from Bloomberg's inaugural Women, Money and Power event in London, as new data reveals that the most gender-diverse companies deliver higher returns.
And in other news, the Syrian rebel group that toppled Assad's regime says it's now forming a transitional government, but questions remain about what comes next. Plus, police charge a male suspect with murder after the fatal shooting of United Health executive Brian Thompson in New York last week. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The representation of women on boards has almost tripled since 2010, and the most gender-diverse companies are delivering higher shareholder returns. Exclusive analysis by Bloomberg Intelligence shows that in developed markets, the top 20% of companies for female board membership return between 2 and 5% more than the bottom 20%. The new data comes as the UK's Labour government works to boost investment in female-led businesses. That effort is being led by Hannah Bernard, head of business banking at Barclays and co-chair of the government's Invest in Women task force.
I think we now need to collectively change the system and raise the profile. And I think having the first female chancellor is helpful. I think having the support of Minister Gustafsson is helpful because it starts to show that it's important politically as well as economically. It's not, and this is a commercial thing. It's not just about ticking boxes and doing the right thing. It is a commercial imperative that we start to unlock the potential of women in the UK.
Hannah Bernard of Barclays speaking to Bloomberg Radio. Research from the organisation 25 by 25 shows women now hold 23% of roles that typically lead to CEO positions in FTSE 100 companies. That's up from 16% in 2021. However, despite that increase, only 9 out of 100 FTSE 100 CEOs are women. Well, one of the world's most prominent female CEOs is Jane Fraser, the boss of Citi Group. Currently halfway through her 5-year plan to turn around the bank, she says she's now focusing her efforts on improving technology, reducing costs and growing fee revenues. In an exclusive interview ahead of Bloomberg's Women, Money and Power conference, Fraser sought to highlight a leaner international operation and a fresh focus on wealth management. But she says she won't grade her turnaround efforts just yet.
We aren't done yet, so I can't give ourselves a grade yet. I've always said that this is a multi-year journey. We're going to be very disciplined about making sure that we don't take shortcuts. And the problem with grading yourself along the way is it becomes too tempting to do a quarter-by-quarter grade, as opposed to we're just very, very focused and accountable for delivering what the end product looks like.
Investors, analysts and Citigroup's board aren't waiting to judge Jane Fraser's progress as CEO. The stock continues to trail peers, and analysts now predict that she will fall short of her 2026 goal for returns. Now, women are controlling increasing sums of money around the world, setting the stage for major shifts in wealth management and philanthropy. With more, here is Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo.
Women are expected to control $34 trillion of investable assets in the US by 2030. That's up from $7.3 trillion just 10 years ago, according to figures from McKinsey. In Western Europe, women are expected to hold 45% of assets under management by the end of the decade. The trend is being driven by demographics. Women are living longer than men, leaving them to control family fortunes. The shift is also being helped by greater numbers of women pursuing lucrative careers. Leaders of US financial advisory firms say they're adapting their operations to better serve women, as female clients value transparency and collaboration more than men do. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
More than 600 senior women in finance are attending Bloomberg's Women, Money and Power event in London today to discuss the future of investing, asset management and banking, as well as the role of women as investors and leaders.
In other news, Israel has stepped up its attacks on military sites in Syria, striking hundreds of targets across the country. According to multiple reports, the strikes targeted army bases, airports and surface-to-air missile systems. The attacks come as Syrian rebel group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham appointed Mohammed Al Bashir to form a transitional government. HTS is considered a terrorist organisation by many countries, but the UK's former ambassador to Syria, Simon Collis, says governments will need to engage with them.
Syria has a future now. Under Assad, it had no future. To understand which way the wind is blowing and to do what we can to nudge things in the right direction, protection of the rights of women, minorities, that kind of thing, you have to talk to people.
Simon Collis speaking there. Local TV reported that Mohammed Al Bashir, who ran the territories HTS controlled before it toppled the regime of Bashar Al-Assad, is now tasked with preventing Syria from, quote, slipping into chaos. A 26-year-old man has been charged with the murder of United Health executive Brian Thompson in New York last week. Luigi Mangione was detained in Pennsylvania following a tip-off from a McDonald's employee. The state's governor, Josh Shapiro, says justice will be delivered.
In a civil society, we are all less safe when ideologues engage in vigilante justice. In some dark corners, this killer is being hailed as a hero. Hear me on this. He is no hero.
Mangione's arrest comes after a 5-day manhunt for a killing that police described as targeted and premeditated. He was found with a handwritten manifesto that was critical of healthcare companies' profit motives. And Mondelez is considering buying the US chocolate maker Hershey for $50 billion. Bloomberg has learned the snack food giant has made a preliminary approach about a tie-up. Deals reporter Crystal C broke the story and says any deal would face regulatory scrutiny.
This is a deal that would, in a normal circumstance, attract antitrust reviews. So I don't think we're there yet. Like we said, it's a preliminary approach. Also, the other thing that is unique to the situation is that the deal is subject to approval of the Attorney General in Pennsylvania because of the trust structure. So there are a lot of regulatory hurdles on top of the market hurdles.
See, added that this was the second time that Mondelez had looked at acquiring Hershey. In 2016, it broke off talks after its $23 billion bid was rejected by the chocolate maker. Hershey shares closed up by 11% in New York yesterday. Those are your top stories on the markets. Euro Stoxx 50 futures are down 0.4%. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index is down by 0.2, and the 10-year Treasury yield is 2 basis points lower at 4.19%. Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on the situation in Syria as the rebel group that toppled the Assad regime looks to form a new government. But first, to Caroline, who is across the City of London for Bloomberg's European headquarters for Bloomberg's first Women, Money and Power event. Caroline, good morning. What is the idea behind this event?
Good morning. Things are starting to hot up this morning. This event is to get the most important women in finance gathered together in the same place to meet. It's people like Santander's Anna Botin, Citi Group's Jane Fraser, Man Group's Robin Grew, to hear their views on how they made money in 2024, the outlook for next year. It's less, Stephen, about diversity and female representation than it is simply about hearing their views on everything from M&A to interest rates, geopolitics, all of the investment opportunities that they see in 2025.
This, as there have been drives in many regions to increase female representation on boards, and Bloomberg Intelligence has actually been looking at the effect that this has on companies' performance.
Yeah, absolutely. The research shows that with a greater number of women on boards, you deliver higher returns, between 2 and 5% higher returns in developed markets, and between 2 and 6% lower volatility for emerging markets. That is mixed leadership teams, and having more women at a higher level delivers results. So that is the data. The backdrop, of course, hasn't been all that rosy when you look at the metrics like the gender pay gap or the number of female CEOs. I mean, that's actually gone backwards here in the UK for the FTSE 100. And globally, only 6% of the world's big firms are led by women at CEO level. So there's still a long way to go. But the idea that it delivers results to have mixed leadership teams is very significant. And I was talking to Hannah Bernard from Barclays, who's in charge of the UK's Invest in Women drive, which is backed by the Chancellor Rachel Reeves. She says that it's about increasing investment in women-led and mixed investment teams by investing more in female-founded businesses, because we know that, again, at the start of 2024, private equity investment in female-led companies fell back versus 2023. But actually, if you deliver more of that money, if women control more money, the returns are better.
What about the efforts, Caroline, that are being made in the UK to increase the severe underrepresentation of women in leadership roles in companies? So that you talked about some of the strategy there in terms of investment, but what about efforts to try and get more women into those top jobs?
There are so many initiatives. I mean, it is the gender pay gap reporting is something by law that the UK has to do. That's one primary drive. There's also been, the 30% Club trying to get more women involved at board level to the level of 30%. The 25 by 25 group, which is led by Tara Kemlin-Jones, they have been encouraging corporations to take a more flexible approach to candidates' experience when it comes to getting that CEO seat, because we know that there are more women in the roles that lead to CEO, but it's still a very narrow path. It's very difficult to make that leap. 90% of FTSE 100 bosses are still men, and the numbers have gone down versus 2021. And as the CEO of WB Directors, Fiona Haythorne, has been telling me today, there are still big areas outside of financial services where the regulatory lens has been focused on getting more gender diversity. In other parts of business like tech or private equity, that lens has not been there, that focus hasn't been there, and that's something also that is changing. So there's a lot of impetus for change, but it's still a very difficult needle to move.
OK, Caroline, we'll have plenty more from you at Bloomberg's Women, Money and Power event throughout the morning on the programme. But for now, thank you. Well, let's turn to Syria next, where the rebel group that toppled the regime of Bashar al-Assad has appointed Mohammed Al Bashir to form a transitional government. This as Israel steps up airstrikes on military sites in Syria. Joining us now is Stuart Livingston-Wallace, who heads our coverage of the Middle East, North Africa and Russia here at Bloomberg. Stuart, let's start with the news of those Israeli airstrikes in Syria. Signs of concerns over the opposition groups that toppled Assad's government over the weekend?
Yeah, good morning. I mean, it seems to be primarily driven by their concerns about where all this weaponry ends up. And we are talking about really, really serious amounts of munitions, and that also includes weapons of mass destruction, so chemical supplies and stockpiles and that sort of thing. And we know Assad was using chemical warfare probably as recently as 2018. So it's definitely a real thing. Now, their chief concern is looking at places like Libya, Iraq, Yemen, all these examples of countries where the central government collapses, you have a chaotic situation in the aftermath, and a lot of the weaponry that was built up by the regime then falls into multiple hands, and then obviously there's a very high risk that it then becomes incredibly dangerous. So what they seem to be doing is trying to knock out those sites as quickly as they can. Now, Israel is being somewhat reticent about what exactly they're up to, but as you say, there have been multiple reports from multiple sources saying, we're probably looking at a couple of hundred or more attacks overnight on very specific sites. So that seems to be what's happening in the air, and then on the ground they've moved out of that buffer zone next to the Golan Heights and into positions previously occupied by the Syrian army, because they just basically left. And there is some sort of debate about how far into Syria they will go. Again, it seems to be largely aimed at protecting the Golan Heights. Very hard to know what the long-term picture is going to look like there, because we just don't know what's going to be happening on the ground in Syria.
OK, so that's the latest in terms of those activities. Meanwhile, the group HTS that toppled Assad's regime has named Mohammed Al Bashir as the man who's expected to lead a new transitional government. What do we know about him, first of all?
I mean, it's very difficult to say. We know a little bit about him. We know he was trained as an engineer. We know that he was sort of running the provisional government or the temporary government in Idlib province. That was the sort of the area controlled by HTS originally. So I suppose there is some experience there in terms of running civil society and, keeping things moving. But quite what the intention here is really hard to tell at the moment because, the situation on the ground is very, very difficult. There's not one unified party that is leading the efforts. You have a patchwork of rebel groups, some of whom have unified, many of whom have not. You've got big international actors in various parts of the country, notably in the north with Turkey. You've got the US in the south. You've got, as I mentioned previously, Israel coming in from the west. Where do you go forward from there? They are clearly attempting to come up with some sort of government system, but quite what that might look like and whether this guy ends up running it, really hard to tell at the moment.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.